After facing stiff opposition from the Ukrainian army, Russia came to the conclusion that it could not win this war. Putin made the decision to use an unconventional strategy in order to change the situ. However, Ukrainian soldiers were successful in courting this plot. It was like a movie. The Ukrainian soldiers were the source of all the information that a NCA Daily News team needed regarding this event. The valor of the Ukrainian armed forces will be brought to the attention of the entire world as a direct result of the extraordinary efforts of our group. In order for our team to continue this work, we require you are able to show your support for us by clicking the Super Things button that is located below this video. If you are prepared, we can now tell you about an extraordinary event that just took place after Vladimir Putin came to the conclusion that the Russian army was not sufficient to defeat Ukraine. He conceived of an innovative strategy. He issued orders for the Russian army to seize the belongings of Ukrainian soldiers who had been captured by the Russian soldiers dressed themselves up as Ukrainian soldiers so that they could feel more at home in the conflict zone. Midnight marked the first time that the soldiers were dispatched to the region of Kharkov that was under Russian occupation. They just recently made a covert entry into the territory that is under the control of the Ukrainian army. They would be dispatched to the Trini Oblast, which is located to the north of Kiev and shares a border with Lar. They plan to launch an assault on the Belarusian border from this geographic region. Belarus would likely conclude from this that Ukraine was waging war against it. As a direct consequence of this development, the army of Belarus would wage war against Ukraine. Putin's strategy was deceptively straightforward. Other wars have also seen the execution of plans very similar to this. This type of operation is known as a false flag operation. In most cases, states carry out such operations in an attempt to paint themselves as victims and win support. On the international stage, however, the act of using false flags is nothing more than slander. Following Putin's briefing of the Russian commanders on this plan, approximately 100 Russian soldiers were sent in. These soldiers came from a variety of different battalions and were chosen for this mission. This operation was given to the least seasoned soldiers in the Russian army's ranks to handle. Putin continued to send soldiers into harm's way, despite the fact that it was widely believed that these soldiers would be killed by the Belarusian army during the conflict. 100 Russian soldiers, recruited from 10 separate units and outfitted in the military uniforms of Ukrainian prisoners, marched off into the night. These service members were loaded into 520 different military passenger vehicles. The soldiers entered Ukrainian territory in relatively large numbers, but in small groups. The Ukrainian soldiers didn't notice them until much. However, due to the fact that the Russian soldiers were dressed in Ukrainian military uniforms, no one suspected that they were involved. However, the soldiers stationed in the observation tower of the Ukrainian army became suspicious when they noticed an increase in the number of troops in the vicinity. They started keeping a close eye on the newcomers through their bino. The Ukrainian army did not have any plans to launch a new operation in this region, despite the fact that all of these soldiers appeared to be very anxious. The skilled soldier began to have more doubts about the owner and continued to keep an eye on him. He was using binoculars to observe his surroundings when he came across an extraordinary detail. There was an odd quality about the way these soldiers dressed in their uniform. On the sleeves of the military uniforms, the crest of the Ukrainian flag was positioned in an inverted position. The spotter communicated their findings immediately to their superiors. When the commanders arrived at the observation towers, they immediately began observing their surroundings through the binoculars. The inverted flag served as a warning. The Ukrainian military was aware that Russia had conducted operations under a false flag in a number of previous wars. It was believed that Russia could also carry out an operation like this during this conflict. This is the reason why every single soldier was trained in this skill. It was communicated to the captured Ukrainian soldiers that they were required to remove their flags from their uniforms and adhere them in. And that is precisely what the captured Ukrainian soldiers did. This resulted in the Russian soldiers being found out and about. The commanders at Zelensky were successful in thwarting Putin's plan, thanks to an extremely astute strategy. However, things were not simple for the Ukrainian soldiers. At this point, there were only 20 Ukrainian soldiers stationed at the base while 100 Russian soldiers had already. The Ukrainian soldiers didn't waste any time and came up with a strategy right away to begin. Their primary objective was to disperse the Russian troops across a variety of locations. The rockets were prepared by 4 Ukrainian soldiers. The machine guns were taken over by 6 different soldiers. The remaining 10 soldiers readied their weapons and awaited further instructions regarding them. An initial attempt was made by Ukrainian soldiers to split the Russian army in two. The soldiers were under fire from 2 different directions at the same time. The soldiers operating the machine guns fired in 2 distinct directions, thereby dividing the Russian soldiers into 2 separate groups. At this point, soldiers armed with rocket launchers entered. Rockets were fired in rapid succession in the direction of the Russian soldiers who were the target. After suffering significant casualties, the Russian soldiers came to the conclusion that they had been betrayed. They quickly retrieved their firearms and began opening fire, but the rocket assault rendered their weapons ineffective. By the time the Ukrainian troops ran out of rockets, there had already been 56 Russian soldiers taken out of them. However, there were even more Russian soldiers present. However, the Russian soldiers had very little combat experience. The Ukrainian soldiers kept up their valiant efforts while engaged in combat. In addition to this, from a military standpoint, Ukrainian troops were in a more advantageous position. The Russian soldiers were completely exposed and defenseless, and there was nowhere for them to hide or. The Ukrainian soldiers fired on them from watchtowers and trenches. After a protracted conflict, Ukrainian soldiers became very proficient with their machine guns. 33 more Russian soldiers were killed. The Russian soldiers eventually came to the conclusion that they were unable to win this battle. They came to the conclusion that the only option was to surrender and give up there. 11 Russian soldiers disarmed themselves and surrendered before being captured during their interrogation. The Russian soldiers who had surrendered were completely forthcoming with all of their information. This is how the false flag operation that Putin was running was uncovered regarding this particular matter. The Ukrainian Northern Operational Command has issued according to reports from Ukrainian authorities, Russian forces are allegedly attempting to stage possible false flag operations in the international border regions of the Trinity Oblast. In addition, the most recent report on Russia's false flight operations has been made available online by the International Institute for the Study of War. It is clear from these reports that Putin is in a desperate. Putin is irate because this strategy is not producing the desired results. Putin is exerting a great deal of effort, but to no avail in an attempt to draw Belarus into this conflict. It is currently extremely unlikely that the Russian army will be able to win this war. The time for schemes is quickly running out. The government of Zelensky has put together a robust defense mechanism to counteract every one of Putin's schemes since the beginning of the conflict. Every one of Putin's plans for an attack has been stopped in its tracks before it could be executed. The intelligence community in Ukraine is also working very hard to uncover Russia's attack plans as a direct result of these efforts. It is now common knowledge that a significant portion of Russia's offensive strategies have been uncovered. There has been a significant breakdown in the Russian military's intelligence recently. A significant number of high-ranking officials in Russia are of the opinion that this war should end as soon as humanly possible. As a result of this, it is believed that certain Russian officials are communicating classified information to the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian intelligence service is engaged in top-secret work and is successfully thwarting Putin's schemes. As Putin's schemes begin to unravel, he is going completely. What are your thoughts on the Russian operation to plant a false flag? In your opinion, what other steps will Vladimir Putin take to convince the Belarusian military to participate in this conflict? What are your thoughts on the fact that Putin's plans have been made public? What are your thoughts on the work done by the Ukrainian military and intelligence services? Do you believe that the military strategies employed by the Ukrainians were successful in this operation? We are very interested in hearing your thoughts. Keep up with us here for further updates. Every Right Studies video can be found on YouTube's Daily News channel. There is no need to rely on any other social media publications. Our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook usernames are all listed on the Daily News. We take legal action against every website and channel that utilizes it without our authorization. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has resulted in both losses and gains over the past year. Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, made the announcement that his country's armed forces had begun a military operation in the Donbass region late on the evening of February 23, 2020. Putin's military operation was a form of expression that had been censored in order to conceal the idea of invading Ukraine. This is due to the fact that it has been widely acknowledged across the globe that the Russian army has been conducting attacks against civilians and carrying out a variety of other inhumane acts for the past year. Fighting erupted in the Ukrainian cities of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kharkiv in the early hours of February 20th. The level of violence in the fighting escalated throughout the day. Putin was under the impression that he would be able to occupy the territories he desired in a matter of weeks, at which point the Ukrainian leader Zelensky would capitulate. But Putin was confronted with an unforeseen reality. The Ukrainian people and Zelensky put up a valiant fight against the Russian occupants of there. The Ukrainian army, which was in a defensive position at the beginning of the war, quickly switched to an offensive position. This change occurred so quickly that the Ukrainian army's attacks extended all the way to Crimea, which was occupied by the Russian army in 2014. By asserting that the conflict began in Crimea and will come to an end with the conquest of Crimea, Zelensky, a leader of the Ukrainian government, demonstrated his resolve to fight the occupation. The nations of the West and Europe, unable to remain silent in the face of Putin's inhumane attempt to occupy Ukraine, have provided financial assistance to the country. It was enough to corner the Russian invaders thanks to the support of Western and European. The determination of Ukrainian leaders Linsky, the strength of the army, and the belief of the people. Let's conduct an in-depth analysis of the major assaults that the Ukrainian army launched against the invading Russian forces. A quick refresher is in order before we dive into an analysis of the developments that have occurred during the first year of the Russia-Ukraine war. As members of the United Daily News, we will continue to report on the conflict in Russia and Ukraine in a way that is both accurate and objective, and we will share all the details of the conflict with you. You can show your support for our whole team by clicking the Super Thanks button, which will acknowledge everyone who was involved in the production of these reports. The submersion of the Kerch Bridge in the depths of the Black Sea was unquestionably the most significant assault carried out by the Ukrainian army in the past 12. In addition, this attack took place just one day after Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, celebrated his birthday on October 8. As a way of celebrating Vladimir Putin's birthday, the Ukrainian army carried out a bomb attack on the Kerch Bridge. The fact that the Russian army was forced to suffer a significant reverse as a result of the destruction of this bridge is due to the fact that the Kerch Bridge was the only bridge that connected Russia to Crimea, almost immediately after he invaded Crimea. In 2014, the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, issued an order for the construction of the Kerch Bridge. With the help of this bridge, Vladimir Putin intended to transport ammunition and other supplies from Russia to the territories in Ukraine that he intended to. But the operation that was carried out by the Ukrainian army was so successful that it buried the Kerch Bridge, along with Putin's plan, in the depths of the sea. Another significant victory for the Ukrainian army was the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian occupation. Kherson was reportedly taken by Russian forces within the first few months of the occupation, and the Russian government made the announce. However, in the fall, the Russian occupiers in Kherson were surprised by a major assault that was launched against them due to the fact that Kherson was one of the few port cities in Ukraine. It held a significant amount of importance for the country's exports, as well as its access to the Black Sea via the Dnipro River. Therefore, the Ukrainian army carried out a number of offensive operations throughout the month of November to ensure that the Russian invaders completely withdrew from the country. The plans that Russian President Vladimir Putin had to expand his country into Ukrainian territory through Ukraine have been foiled. During the course of the year-long conflict, the Ukrainian army presented Russia's army with a historic Semi-Ripple and Bakhmut are the cities that best represent the spirit of the resistance. The UF steel plant in Mariupol was described as a symbol of resistance by the international press. This was in reference to the Ukrainian armed forces at this plant. UF troops from the Ukrainian National Guard successfully defended against a number of assaults carried out by Russia. The ongoing fighting in the region has demonstrated that the Russian military's claims that they have taken control of the city of Mariupol are false despite the fact that they continue to make these claims. The city of Bakhmut was the target of yet another hoax announcement of capture perpetrated by the Russian occupiers. Nevertheless, Bakhmut is a city in which the Ukrainian army defeated the Russian invaders and established itself as a historical, to such an extent that the Russian army was unsuccessful in its attempt to take the city despite sending thousands of soldiers there. Beginning in June, the deployment of Wagner Group soldiers in the direction of Obama was also unsuccessful in a last-ditch effort. Prisoners from Russian prisons were granted their freedom and instructed not to engage in combat. A resistance put up by the Ukrainian army against Russian invaders at Blackout resulted in the destruction of thousands of Russian soldiers and tons of ammunition. This resistance will be remembered throughout history. Major offensive operations against the invaders were organized by the Ukrainian army in the first few days of the year 2023. The Russian military base was destroyed in the first few hours of the new year in the first of these opera, which was the explosion of the base. This particular military base was significantly larger than any of the occupiers' other bases. According to reports, over 700 Russian soldiers and 3 senior Russian commanders were stationed at the Maka base. In addition to that, a portion of the military base served as a storage facility for the ammunition as a holiday. The Ukrainian army has given the Russian invaders some HIMARS missiles, Merry Christmas. At the same time that the missiles struck the base, the city of Machika was subjected to an unprecedentedly loud explosion sound, and residents could see flames rising into the sky. It was reported that as a direct consequence of this explosion, approximately 500 of the Russian invaders' soldiers were killed, and numerous tons of ammunition and equipment were rendered use. The most significant headquarters of the Chechen leader Kadi were destroyed by an explosion in the first few days of 2023 as part of yet another significant operation that was carried out by the Ukrainian army. How did the Rose headquarters in the city of Zapia, which is situated in the southern region of Ukraine, get blown up as a result of the Ukrainian army's bombardment? It was reported that this attack resulted in the deaths of hundreds of Chechen. Citation needed according to reports from the area. This assault resulted in the deaths of between 200–500 Chechen soldiers as a direct result of the sanctions imposed by countries in the West and Europe. Russia has not only suffered a loss of military personnel and ammunition, but has also experienced a significant loss of financial resources. Russia held the record for having the most sanctions placed against it in the annals of world. This served as further evidence that the international community is united in its opposition to Russia's occupation of Ukraine and in its support for Ukraine. Let's take a look at how the economy of Russia has completely collapsed. At the beginning of the month of January, the Russian Ministry of Finance issued a statement regarding the budget shortfall that the country was experiencing. As a direct result of this, Russia's budget deficit increased to 1.76 trillion rubles in January, which is equivalent to 24.8 billion. Because of the widening gap between revenues and expenditures, the Russian economy has regressed by 25 years since 1998. This is the first time that Russia has had a budget deficit of such a significant M. Additionally, a statement was issued by the ministry regarding gas and oil tax revenues, which are the most significant components of the Russian economy. It was reported in January 2023 that taxes on gasoline and oil had decreased by 46% in comparison to the previous year's total amount. On the other hand, it was stated that the increase in budget expenditures was 59%. Russia is experiencing the severe decline on both the military and economic fronts. It is highly unlikely that Putin will keep the occupation going with this kind of burnout. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army continues to press its advantage over the Russian army, which is seeing its strength gradually increase. What are your thoughts on the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has now entered its second? How much longer do you anticipate that this war will last? What are your thoughts on the fact that the Ukrainian army has been successful in their offensive maneuvers? Please let us know your thoughts. Keep up with us here for further updates. The ATP Daily News channel on YouTube is the owner of all the Right Studies videos. We do not rely on any other social media public, and our usernames for Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook are all located at the @Daily News website. We pursue legal action against every website and channel that utilizes it without our authorization. The news is not good for Putin. The Turks arrived to lend their support to Ukraine. The Turkish army has sent convoys all the way to the Russian border. In response to the downing of the Turkish ship in the Black Sea by Russian forces, the Kremlin issued a red alert. Things are in a terrible state right now. What are some of the next steps that Vladimir Putin will take now that he has lost the one country in the West that he could potentially form an alliance with? The belligerent stance taken by Turkey will end up being very expensive for Putin. In the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, there is only one weapon that has been significant from the very beginning of the conflict. The introduction of this weapon not only altered the overall trajectory of the conflict, but also inspired Ukrainian soldiers to compose songs about it. We are speaking about bioreactors, which are the preferred method of weaponry among Ukrainians. One of the most significant unmanned aerial vehicles in existence is called Bayraktar. Since the beginning of this conflict, Turkey has supplied Ukraine with characters that are being purchased by Ukraine. The most essential quality possessed by the director claims that these attack drones do not only have the kamikaze feature like other attack drones, but that they are also powerful enough to deal a major blow to the Russian army and capable of expanding Ukraine's intelligence network. As a result, it holds a position of very significant importance among UAVs. However, Turkey's most recent action will completely alter the path that the war will take. It is now common knowledge throughout the media of the entire world that Russia's recent efforts to find allies have been fruit. On the other hand, Ukraine is currently considering Ukraine to be an ally. This is due to the fact that Ukraine has been fighting for just cause ever since the conflict began. However, by successfully persuading Turkey to become an ally, it has caused a significant amount of harm to Russia because Russia intended to turn Turkey into a natural gas base. Russia had a plan to do. But in these days when Russia has nothing to do, these plans have been seriously thwarted in their attempts in the midst of the mobilization of fleets of ships to deliver specific ammunition to Ukraine. Turkey initiated support for Ukraine through the use of a double axe. As soon as it was clear what Turkey was going to do, Putin began searching for a way out of the situation. In spite of the fact that it is common knowledge that Ukraine makes regular use of bioreactors, Turkey has taken a very significant step in reaction to this with the intention of building, and Neil Barrett, our factory in Ukraine will now completely reverse Putin's invasion. This is because with this step, Ukraine's superiority in the air will come to a point that is completely different from where it was. Putin, aware that his power is teetering on the brink, is threatening the nations that are in support of Ukraine because he can no longer ignore these facts, which are common knowledge around the globe in preparation for any assistance that might be offered to Ukraine in the immediate aftermath of this plan. Turkey, ready to significant number of the weapons that it possesses specific. Hedgehogs are of critical importance in this context. Consequently, an army of hedgehogs that was large enough to construct a substantial column of armored vehicles was dispatched to Ukraine. This support has the potential to completely alter the path that the war will take, as Russia will have limited options available to it as long as Ukraine's military continues to undergo modern. It is possible to say that if Ukraine maintains this advantage, Russia will be hit in the heart. But the backdrop to this event is the complete end of Russia's dominance in the Black Sea. In other words, Russia will no longer be the dominant power in the Black Sea. The reasoning behind why Turkey is providing this assistance has reverberated all over. With this seemingly relaxed move, Turkey is in fact sending a message to Russia that it is Russia's right to dominate in the Black Sea. The Black Sea, over which Russia claims sovereignty in many areas, has recently transformed into a body of water that helps to lay the foundation for providing assistance to Ukraine. Although Ukraine may express its gratitude to Russia for providing this, the country's primary objective is to, as quickly as possible, expel Russia from its territory. However, Turkey is becoming increasingly frustrated as a result of Russia's about-face. In addition to these steps, Russia has recently been conducting drills in the Black Sea, and during one of these drills, Russia hit a Turkish merchant. This hit increased attention considerably, since Russia openly wants to say that my vote is important in the Black Sea, which is why Turkey supports Ukraine. The main reason for Turkey's support for Ukraine is that Russia has recently been conducting exercises in the Black Sea. The most important thing is to make a shrewd move to stop this from happening, mobilizing all of the domains that are available to put Russia in the opposite corner. When Putin found out about this support, he became extremely enraged and made a significant choice. He made the announcement that they had made the decision to abandon the decision of the natural gas base he wanted to build in Turkey, and that they had made the decision to determine a different epicenter base. Instead, because of this, the already strange relations between Turkey and Russia became even more. As a direct consequence of this, Turkey is anticipated to offer significantly more support because of the effects that recent innovations in the defense industry have had. Turkey is seen as the power that will ultimately decide the outcome of this conflict. The fact that even Turkey, which remained neutral even during World War II, is supporting Ukraine is a sign that Russia's hegemonic position in the world is coming to an end, according to analysts of military. This is due to the fact that Turkey typically conveys its neutrality through the use of such words. However, the unpredictable policies and actions of Putin have made it very difficult for Turkey to predict what will occur if things continue to deteriorate. The word complicated does not exist, despite the fact that it is unknown for how much longer Russia will keep making these moves. The sinking of the Turkish merchant ship was a significant event that significantly complicated things. NATO has been activated in response to the possibility of an attack on the support that is being sent by Turkey. Many people consider Turkey to be one of the most important countries in NATO because of its technological preeminence and its military might. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, counts it as one of its decision-making mechanisms. This remains the same in spite of all of the variables involved. As a result, a potential attack by Russia against Turkey could very quickly escalate into a global conflict. Let's take a look at the factors that contributed to this together in terms of its place. In the international political order, Turkey occupies a central position. Because of this, the geography of the area is very significant. It plays the role of a mediator due to the fact that it is a distant country in relation to all of the other countries. It's excellent. Its actions in international affairs have also made it an indispensable ally. One of the primary reasons that Russia and the United States enjoy positive relations with Turkey is because of this factor. The recent warming of relations between Ukraine and Turkey has started to destabilize the current situation. Because Turkey is a Western country, it immediately began to take steps to support Ukraine after learning of its plight. Previous encounters between Turkish and Russian troops had taken place covertly in Syria. In light of this information, Ukraine has from the very beginning been making efforts to enlist Turkey on its side. Recently, Ukraine's efforts to improve relations with its neighbors have started to bear. Because Turkey considers Russia to be an adversary in the Black Sea, and because this adversary needs to be defeated as quickly as possible, the damage will be significantly worse if Turkey maintains its silence in response to these events. Therefore, right off the bat, Turkey needs to demonstrate to Russia who the true owner of the Black Sea is, because the technologies developed by Turkey are generally regarded as being the weapons of Turkey's military strategists believe that many of their country's armaments will prove to be decisive in this conflict. Russia is trying to respond to this as they are aware of it. Iran was the source of the unmanned aerial vehicles that it purchased. On the other hand, Barak stars are stomping all over them in the battlefield. Therefore, it would appear that Ukraine has decided on the country it will work out extremely. If it hadn't done that, the Ukrainian army would have faced a significant amount of difficulty fighting Russia because the assistance offered by the United States is restricted to the purpose of self-defense. The Ukrainian army is helpless in certain positions. It would appear that the Ukrainian army which has never been able to advance to an offensive position, has found a solution that addresses every aspect of. A significant number of the weapons that Turkey has supplied are also capable of being employed in offensive operations. Given that every nation is aware of this fact, there are some nations that are opposed to Turkey support. The potential for a third world war is the primary factor in this situation. Because of this potential, all nations desire for Russia to maintain its occupation of their territory. Countries such as the United States of America, Germany, Turkey, and Israel prefer to act bravely and take action against the unjust occupation as a response to the cowardice of other nations, particularly how boldly Turkey's move was mentioned. Again and again since Russia is cornered, it has been widely reported in the international press for some time that it is unclear how these tensions will be. Japan is currently taking part in the conflict that is taking place between Russia and Ukraine. According to statements made by Japanese Prime Minister Fuokai, the Japanese army will take part in operations within the territory of Ukraine. The Kremlin issued high alert in response to statements made by Kishida. The conflict that has been going on between Russia and Ukraine for the past year has started to become more. The statements made by Russian leader of Vladimir Putin, while everyone was waiting for the war to end, showed that the war would drag on for even longer than anyone anticipated. The increased military presence along the border was ordered by Russian President Vladimir Putin with Belarus and the Crimean Peninsula, mobilizing Ukraine and its allies, Russian forces, and the Luhansk region. Don't ask about other regions where fighting is still going, are still attacking the Ukrainian army. Allied nations include Belarus and the Crimean Peninsula. With the defense lines that it has established here, the Ukrainian army does not permit the Russian forces to pass through. However, when it became known that Putin intended to launch a springtime assault against the Ukrainian army involving 500,000 troops, the Ukrainian army decided to take defensive measure. Over the past few months, Russian forces have been making repeated attempts to take control of the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Japan issued a statement shortly after the United States and Germany took steps to thwart a new attack plan hatched by the Russian forces occupying the territory. Relations between Japan and Russia have been tense for the entirety of the 77 years that preceded Japan's involvement in the conflict. The conflict in Ukraine was ultimately influenced by the tension that existed between these two countries. During the early months of the war, the Japanese government was one of the first in the world to enforce its laws. Sanctions and embargoes have been placed on Russia with the statement that they do not recognize the occupation and annexation of Ukrainian territory by the Russian Prime Minister Kishida. Japan announced that Japan has severed all trade ties with the government of Russia, and that Japan is also in the process of gradually withdrawing its businesses that are currently operating in Russia. Japan, which did not provide military support to Ukraine, but imposed sanctions on Russia, was attempting to adopt a neutral stance at the beginning of the conflict by not sending military support to Ukraine. However, after the Russian army launched an attack on Japanese islands, the Japanese Prime Minister's patience ran out and he lost it. The territorial dispute over the Korea Islands that has been going on between Russia and Japan for many years has prompted Japan to take a stance against Russia. Putin, who years ago illegally annexed the Korean islands that rightfully belonged to Japan, dispatched Russian Navy ships to a location off the coast of the Korean islands to ensure the safety of these islands in order to better defend its country's borders. The Japanese military capped Navy ships whenever they came close to the core islands. These naval vessels, which were tasked with the protection of their own island, were maintained in a defensive position against a new threat posed by Russia, and what was anticipated actually transpired. The Russian Navy ships stationed in the Korean islands asserted that Japanese ships had breached the border and organized artillery fire on the Japanese islands, which they claimed the Russian ships had witnessed. The government of Japan came to the conclusion that the best way to avoid starting a new war was to withdraw its own naval vessels and refrain from launching an attack on the ships of the Russian Navy. However, 2 days after Russia's attack, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida made a statement saying that they had responded positively to Ukraine's request for military support. Kai said that they would provide Ukraine with the support it requests. Following Russia's threats, the Prime Minister of Japan stated that Russian President Vladimir Putin had illegally annexed the Kuril Islands in the past and was now attempting to do the same on Ukrainian territory, and that this must be stopped. The Japanese Prime Minister was responding to Russia's threats. He stated that it should not be allowed for the Russian forces to advance further on Ukrainian territory and announced that they will be sending a large number of tanks and armored vehicles to Ukraine, which are also utilized by the Japanese army. The decision to send these items to Ukraine was made by the Japanese government. 15 battle tanks of the Type 90 model and 15 armored vehicles of the Type 96 model have been ordered for the Ukraine. During the same time, Japan announced that it will ship a significant quantity of ammunition and beacons to Ukraine, both of which will come from the inventory of the Japanese army. In addition to this, it was disclosed that 50 Japanese officers will be dispatched to Ukraine in order to instruct the crews of these tanks. Japanese officials have stated that they are aware that the Russian army is having a difficult time, and they hope that the Ukrainian territory and all of its supports will soon be completely liberated from occupation. After the tanks and armored vehicles have arrived in Ukraine and the training has been completed, Japanese officials have stated that they have decided to increase the sanctions and embargoes that they have imposed on Russia. These officials also stated that they will organize a new military shipment again in the coming months after the completion of both of these. The Japanese government has pledged to provide tanks and armored vehicles, and their delivery is anticipated within the next few weeks. One of Putin's most serious blunders was the attack on the Japanese islands carried out by a Russian naval vessel. As a result of Putin's success in drawing Japan, which had for a long time taken a neutral stance into the conflict, Ukraine is now being fought over by Japanese. Following the statements made by the Japanese Prime Minister, Putin's response was not delayed in any way. Putin made the decision to dispatch the Belgorod as part of his ongoing aggressive foreign policy submarine, known as Russia's war machine, to the Kuril Islands. This submarine is known as the largest submarine produced by the Russian military in the last 30 years. It is a component of Russia's largest naval force and the country's largest naval force. This vessel, which is known as the Belgorod, is loaded with nuclear weapons. This nuclear weapon carried by the submarine has the potential to wipe out a significant metropolitan area. Shortly after Vladimir Putin's statement, the Japanese intelligence service stated that the Belgorod submarine had arrived in the waters off of Kuril Island and was being kept waiting there. Does Vladimir Putin, who is already at war with Ukraine, intend for this move to stoke the flames of a new conflict? The decline of Russia under Vladimir Putin's rule continues unabated. Recent demonstrations in Russia against Vladimir Putin's rule have begun to instill fear in the country's leader. Putin, who is in danger of losing his throne, is attempting to win the support of the Russian people by starting a new war in order to distract them from his predicament. The Russian leader is well aware that he can maintain his position as long as the conflict between the two countries continue. In his address to the parliament, in which he announced that Ukraine has acquired a new ally, the leader of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, expressed gratitude to the Prime Minister of Japan, Fukai, that was part of Zelensky's commitment. They have stated that they will not allow Japan's support to go to waste, and that they will free their country from the Russian forces that have invaded. The relationship between Ukraine and Japan goes back a very long time. You are probably aware that the Ukraine was the first country to acknowledge that Japan was the rightful owner of the Korean islands. After Russia annexed them, the leader of Ukraine extended an invitation to the Prime Minister of Japan to visit Kiev so that he could provide him with an update on the ongoing. After hearing reports that the Russian army was planning to launch a new attack on Ukrainian territory, many states abandoned their neutral stance in the conflict. The countries that are allied with Ukraine began to increase their support for Ukraine after they came to the realization that a new Russian landing in Ukraine would result in the complete loss of Ukrainian territory. Even Germany, which had for a long time opposed the idea of sending tanks and armored vehicles to Ukraine, agreed to send Leopard tanks there. According to a German government statement, the shipment of 14 Leopard 2 tanks is currently underway. The United States announced that it would send Abrams tanks to Ukraine around the same time that the Ukrainian army began its operations. A large number of nations have come together to support. Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, has begun to make preparations for the impending attack by the Russian army. Zelensky, who has deployed thousands of soldiers to the border with Belarus, is under the impression that Russia will launch its offensive from the border with Belarus. As a result of Kiev's proximity to the Belarusian border, the Russian army is in a position to rapidly advance and invade the Ukrainian capital because Zelensky is determined to stop this from happening. He has begun constructing defense lines and fronts in Ukrainian cities that border Belarus. In addition, Zelensky stated that the U.S.-supplied Tamaras missiles that are being sent to Ukraine will be positioned in regions close to the Belarusian border, and he stated that these missiles will prevent a new invasion of Russian forces. Residents of Ukraine who are located along the border with Belarus are also providing assistance to Ukrainian troops. The locals have begun to collaborate with the Ukrainian soldiers in the construction of defense lines and the setting of traps. It is expected that Russian President Vladimir Putin will make an announcement about mobilization in the near future. However, the announcement about this mobilization appears to start Putin. Is this a new attack? 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 Is this a new attack?